Robert Driscoll. He is a former Justice Department official. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So what do you make of this? Is he able to just refuse? Can he refuse?
Well, in the short term, yes, he can refuse. And then it's going to be up to the Judiciary Committee whether they want to vote to hold him in contempt and then force him to testify either under threat of arrest or other compulsory means. But it won't happen, tomorrow or the next day. It's just another step in the process of the brinksmanship that goes on these kind of things when someone doesn't want to testify before a committee on the Hill.
Is his lawyer right in saying that these committees have just become too politically minded?
Well, I mean, I don't know if his lawyer's right or not. I tend to think, it's certainly not a legal basis. I would never have a client who testified on the Hill if, a preening congressman were reason to not testify. Right. That's kind of the nature of the game when you take someone up on the Hill to testify. Usually people have a more reasoned objection, like, oh, I'm going to plead the Fifth, or, there's no jurisdiction of this committee. But to just say, well, they're going to make a spectacle of it, in some ways, that's the point. It's a public event. The imperfect as they are, the representatives are the representatives of the people. So it's the people's chance to see in public this guy testify. So I think that that's not a great legal basis, but it's certainly in the short term, he can just not show up and put the committee to its through its paces to see if they want to hold him in contempt.
So some say that they could just release the testimony of what went on behind closed doors. The other side says that, well, that was his opportunity to get his, side of the case out there, and then he refused to answer other essential questions. So releasing the transcript isn't enough. What's your take on that?
I think, again, with our government, the structure of our government, one of the reasons Congress is there is to represent the people. And I think there's some public benefit to having public testimony. Now, it's probably going to get interrupted by things that are either classified or privileged or things like that. But I do think there's some benefit for the American people being able to have their representatives ask questions. Will it degenerate into a bit of a partisan affair? I'm sure it will. But that is in some ways what the system is set up to have. So I think that, from a purely legal perspective, fine, give me the transcript and I can review it and I'll see what he said. But I do think there's a political constitutional argument here that some kind of public hearings for these kind of things, as high profile as they are, is in essence what Congress is there to do.
Meanwhile, House Republicans are setting a deadline of tomorrow, yet another deadline, for the Justice Department to hand over additional records on the FBI informant who met with Trump campaign officials. Some lawmakers warning that if the DOJ does not comply, that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein could be held in contempt or face impeachment. DOJ says they already produced thousands of documents. I feel like I've heard this fight before.
I know. This never ends. I think both sides are trying to operate in good faith, but I think they don't trust each other, and that's the hard part. I think what's been missing in this is there's kind of been a little bit of an assumption on the Hill that I think that they get everything they ask for, which has never been the case. The executive never has to give over every piece of paper that Congress has asked for. There's always been an exception for things like sources and methods and other particularly sensitive names of witnesses and things like that. And so all these things are always negotiated. Unfortunately, in order to negotiate properly, you need to have some level of trust in both sides. Congress feels like there's been some redactions of some things that should have been redacted.
Right, and they were redacted. You talk about the exceptions under which they don't have to hand things over.
Right.
And it's that the DOJ has said, these are sources and methods, and that's why there's redactions, and that's why we haven't turned it over. And then when you do get those documents later, the congressmen and senators have said when you looked at it, it wasn't about sources and methods, that what was blocked out was just things that were embarrassing to the FBI. So they do have a reason to not have a lot of faith.
No, I think that's true. I think the problem is that obviously, I think as Dag Rosenstein pointed out, he's not the one doing the redactions, obviously. He's the DAG. They've got a staff of 100 FBI agents doing it. And when one of those agents does something wrong and it's pointed out, he can go back and correct, but it's hard to kind of blame him for the day-to-day document production that goes on. And so I think that it is, there's some reason for skepticism from Congress, but there's also reason for skepticism from DOJ, because obviously they've provided things that have ended up leaked, almost immediately at different times as well. And so hopefully they can get everyone together. And the way this usually has to work is Congress needs to say the information they want, not necessarily the documents, and DOJ can say, okay, we'll tell you about it, even if we have to withhold certain documents.
Well, they did that, though. I mean, we have to go, but they said we want to know how this investigation started, and did it start before you said it did? And, it comes down to they want to see the original documents because they're not totally believing the answer. We'll see. Maybe we'll get to it someday. Thank you, sir. Thanks for your time.
When we get to that day.
Right. All right.
The president taking Vladimir Putin at his word that Russia didn't interfere with our election was always silly. It now just got dealt a huge blow with this bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee report that came out today, as it echoes the findings of every other fair broker on the situation. Russia meddled. Trump is kidding himself, and probably only himself, trying to minimize Putin's role. Now, that's just one aspect of this. And there's all this intrigue. Why would the president do this? Why would the president do that? Did Russia help him and he's trying to pay them back by being nice? I don't know the answers to any of those things, and we don't have facts. And none of them erase the legitimate issues that could be going on with the Russia probe on behalf of the U.S. authorities. Enter Peter Strzok, the FBI agent taken off the Russia probe because of these anti-Trump texts. He testified behind closed doors before a House committee last week. Now they're going to bring him back to have him testify in public. Now, his lawyer thinks that this could be a trap by the House GOP. So his name is Eitan Goldman, and he's here now to make the case. Counselor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, first things first, will your client comply with the subpoena or the request? Will he come on in and do another interview?
My client will testify publicly soon, somewhere, sometime. We just got this subpoena today, so I don't know whether or not we are going to be testifying next Tuesday in front of these two particular House subcommittees.
Why isn't it an automatic yes, Eitan?
Because we have come to the conclusion, we've been forced to come to the conclusion that this is not a search for truth. It is a chance for Republican members of the House to preen and posture before their most radical, conspiracy-minded constituents. And if you just look, I mean, you would think that here you have a guy, Peter Strzok, knows some things, wants to tell a story, wants to testify. If you have a committee that actually wants to find out facts, that wants to find out the truth, you might actually have a meeting of interests. But from our experience with the committee thus far, it is obvious that they don't want the truth. They don't want to hear what he has to say.
You had observers who were there. The transcript hasn't been released of the last interview. I know that you've said release it. Look, I'd love that, right? I'm a journalist.
So
I'd love to have information. I'm not in the business of believing what people tell me in the government or anywhere, for that matter. I'd like to see the proof myself. But they say that they found what he said compelling on different levels. So is it fair to say that he hasn't had a chance to tell his story yet?
Who said that they found what he had to say compelling?
Different Democrats who were in the room.
Yeah. Look, Pete has sat and listened as he's been caricatured and misdescribed and accused by the president of treason and of being a sick loser. And on Fox News, they talk about him as the center of this anti-Trump cabal that was determined to throw the election against Trump. None of this has a shred of truth. And Pete has been silent. He's been cooperating with the Inspector General. He's been doing what he's supposed to. And now he wants a chance to actually talk to the American people. So when we heard that these two committees, along with other committees, were interested in talking to Pete, I reached out to them. I said, Pete will come talk to you. You don't need to issue a subpoena. Let's do it publicly. No, we can't do it publicly. Okay, well, can you at least tell me that you'll release a transcript so you don't have House Republicans selectively leaking or misleaking selective excerpts to make him look bad? No, we can't do that either. Well, okay, we'll come in anyway. So we came in, and he testified, and what really kills me is the Republicans, the committee, the first thing they tell us in there is, this is confidential. If you disclose any of this, you could be compromising the integrity of this investigation. And not just it leaked. Republican members during breaks were dashing out to talk to the media. to tell them, this guy, he's not answering questions.
You know what you should have done?
What's that?
You should have brought your client here, because then it would be all live. It would all be on the record. It'd all be out there for people to see, and he'd be tested by someone where the audience gets to see what it is and what it isn't. The offer
there may come a day,
stands.
Chris.
The offer stands. Now, you said something earlier that I gotta come back to you on, which is there's not a shred to any of the allegations. Now, your client put himself in a position of criticism by what he wrote in his texts. I understand he didn't think they'd become public when he was writing them to an intimate. I get that. But the texts came out, and they tell a story that he's going to have to answer for. Trump's not ever going to become president, right? No, he won't. We'll stop it. Now, the Inspector General's report found that he had bias for a reason, and this seems to be proof of it. I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, that there's no way he gets elected. I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40. These are things that are suggestive of a bias against Donald J. Trump, who was running for president at the time. How's that not a fair reading?
Well, I mean, it's a completely fair reading to say that Pete Strzok and Lisa Page were not fans of Donald Trump. I think they both admit that, and they both admit that, in these texts, which they thought were private and ultimately were not, they used some purple language to describe Trump. And, if you go through the times when they're talking about Trump, whether they call him an idiot, whether they use less polite terms, each of those corresponds to something that's happening in the campaign. At one point, Trump is denigrating a family of a fallen war hero, and they have an exchange about that.
But that's justification for a feeling. What I'm saying is, if it existed as a feeling, reasonable or unreasonable, doesn't that make it true that Strzok was acting with a bias when he was doing whatever he was doing because he didn't like this guy? And how could it not affect his decisions?
No, of course it doesn't make it true. I mean, that's what FBI agents do every day, right? Everybody in the FBI's got political opinions. Pete is not the only one who didn't like Trump, and there are a lot of people in the FBI who really, really disliked Hillary and Bill Clinton. Doesn't mean that they
weren't in a position to act on a threat of, we'll stop it.
Yeah, well, I don't know why you think that that's a threat. I think that what he's
How would you characterize it?
I think he does not think. That is right about when Trump was talking about the Khan family. And I don't think that Pete or Lisa Page or, hundreds of millions of other Americans, including a lot of Republicans, thought that it was, there was a chance in hell that Donald Trump was going to be elected at that point. Look, the allegations I was talking about, Chris, that don't have a shred of truth are the ones that put Pete Strzok at the center of this secret society, this Dumbledore's army type of underground cell in the FBI. There's no truth to that.
Right.
And
I mean, they took that from his conversations also, but I've never seen it substantiated. I hear you on that.
Not substantiated. I mean, the IG's been investigating this for months and months. It's a 570-page report, okay? They know why they took different decisions in the Clinton email investigation.
And he said he found bias. He couldn't find it overall, but he did find it. He couldn't rule it out in the idea of how you prioritize different investigations regarding Trump and Hillary. There's certainly things for him to answer for in there. You can't be surprised he's getting criticism.
No, of course not. And he is ready, willing, and able to answer questions about the text.
Gotcha.
The problem with this forum is that, I mean, I don't know if you watched the Rod Rosenstein and Chris Wray testimony the other day.
Hour after hour.
Okay, so the way they treated those two guys, these lifelong Republicans, and not letting them answer a question, filibustering, that is nothing compared to the way they treated Pete Strzok. So
again,
it does not seem to me like a search for truth.
I hear you. I get it. I want to see the transcript so we can make our own judgments.
I want you to see the transcript.
And the offer stands. He will get a full hour here on this show to make any case he wants to make, and there won't be any fly around. Whoa! Almost got it. All right, Eitan Goldman, thank you very much for making your case for your client. The offer stands.
Chris. Okay.